Good evening, everybody. I am John Check of Baseball Central here today to discuss day one of the Weird Meetings. It was no shortage of rumors going on, no shortage of deals going down, and lots of rumors swirling around, and the hot stove is burning right now. So let's get right on into it. Although today was the first official day of the winter meetings, there was moves going on Sunday night when all the GMs and managers and whatnot, brain trusts were piling in to Nashville. And Sunday night, a lot of relievers went off the board. But one of the bigger signings was Hisashi Iwakuma signed a 3-year contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, this was a move that the Dodgers absolutely had to make. They have a very predominant right-handed or left-handed rotation, and they needed some kind of left-hander to break up the monotony a little bit in the rotation. You look who they currently have: Clayton Kershaw, Hyun-Jin Ryu, Alex Wood, Brandon McCarthy, who's really their only other righty, but he's a guy that you can't really depend on, and he's injury prone, as he showed this year. So Hisashi Wakuma is going to slot right behind Clayton Kershaw, yet again pitching behind another huge ace like he did in Seattle when he pitched behind King Felix. And, he's 35, and there's a little bit of risk to this deal. Hisashi Wakuma has only pitched more than 200 innings one time in his entire big league career. And he has had some injury troubles, and he has been, has had some up and down stretches since his near Cy Young year a couple years back. But after losing out on Zach Greinke and being such a left-handed heavy rotation, they needed to do something. And Hisashi Wakuma is a solid option. There was other righties out there like Mike Leake and Jeff Samardzija who got 5 at 90. So, maybe Hisashi Wakuma could be like a Hiroki Kuroda. Like Kuroda was for the Dodgers in the past. So who knows? But it was a good deal by the Dodgers Brain Trust, and he should pitch fair well in that ballpark like he did in Seattle, and pitching in a pitcher-friendly division. So Iwakuma to the Dodgers on a 3-year deal. Next deal, Joakim Soria is going back to the Kansas City Royals. The Kansas City Royals lost Ryan Madson to the Oakland Athletics, of all teams, and they needed someone to go in and fill their depth back up, even though it's already crazy deep as it is, how good the back end of their bullpen is. But it looks like Ryan Madson found himself a new home, and he's going to be in Oakland, and Joakim Soria is coming back to presumably, I'd imagine, set up for Wade Davis. They still have a lot of depth in that bullpen. They still have a lot of quality arms in that bullpen, but the Ryan Madson signing last year with the Royals just proved to show you how smart of a franchise they really are, because no one wanted Ryan Madson. This was a guy, he's on the Phillies. He was their closer. He was dominant. Goes to the Reds, gets hurt, never pitches an inning for them. Goes to the Angels, never pitches an inning for them. Is out of baseball, comes back with the Royals and is absolutely dominating in Royals fashion, typically how every Royals reliever is. And now he gets himself a couple-year deal. And now Joakim Soria, another guy, had Tommy John, comes back with the Rangers. Gets traded to the Tigers. The Tigers deal him to the Pirates. The Pirates couldn't afford to re-sign him, and the Tigers tried to bring him back, but the price was just too high. He ends up getting 3 years, $25 million to go back to Kansas City. The Mexicutioner is back home in a Royals uniform, and I'd imagine he's going to set up for Wade Davis. And it was a solid move by Dayton Moore & Company bringing him back, because this was a guy that, when he first premiered for the Royals, he's one of the better closers in the American League for quite a while. But I guess their bullpen riches just keep getting richer, because that's a great move by the Kansas City Royals, just adding more depth to an already deep bullpen. Now, even more Royals news. Chris Young is back with the Kansas City Royals. Chris Young last year had a solid year. Chris Young is really, since putting on a Royals uniform, has done good work coming out of the splitting time, between the bullpen and the rotation. And Chris Young goes back. 37-year-old gets a 2-year, $11.5 million deal, and I believe there's an option for a third year as well in that contract. And Chris Young, a lot of people say about Chris Young, he's one of the most awkward at-bats there is. This is a guy that doesn't throw very hard and doesn't possess the most nasty stuff, but he's so tall, and the arm angle that he throws out of, the arm slot, I should say, is just so confusing and so hard for hitters to pick up that he just creates awkward at bats. And the ball, even though it's 89, it looks 95 because it gets on you so fast because of his arm and his stride and the deception, his delivery. So, for as well as he pitched with Kansas City and his versatility, this is another solid move for the Royals, and they got him on the cheap. So a couple year deal for a guy who's 37 and who's pitched well for you. That was another solid move for the Kansas City Royals. Some Detroit Tigers news. Mark Lowe agreed to a 2-year deal with the Detroit Tigers, and Jared Saltalamacchia, he agreed to a 1-year deal at league minimum. Now, Al Avila has done great work so far as the Tigers' new general manager. He's done a great job so far at trying to fix their bullpen woes, signing Mark Lowe, trading for K-Rod, and he's still trying to go out and add more depth to the Tigers' bullpen. He's already said he'd like to acquire one more reliever, preferably a lefty. And it was rumored that the Tigers are looking to potentially get a corner outfielder, even though they were connected for a little while to Alex Gordon and Yoenis Cespedes, but since then have been pulled away from talk, saying that they're no longer in the pursuit of either one of those guys' services. But Mark Lowe was a guy reinvented himself last year, and he had an outstanding year in Toronto and Seattle. Between Toronto and Seattle. I don't know why I couldn't remember his first team. And this is a guy, he kind of reinvented himself. His fastball velocity came back. His slider was absolutely filthy. He pretty much reinvented his stuff, and he had an outstanding year. So this is, a quality sign for a team that lacks so much bullpen depth and quality arms. So now you have a bullpen where you could feature Mark Lowe, Alex Wilson, and Francisco Rodriguez as your 7, 8, 9 guys. And I mean that's a quality 1, 2, 3 if Mark Lowe can replicate anything that he did last year. But you look at the Tigers' left side of their bullpen, guys like Blaine Hardy is really their only true option, quality option. They truly do lack a left-handed reliever. And then Salty, this is a guy that he's always had good power, and he had that one really good season with Boston a couple years back before signing with the Miami Marlins for a good amount of money. But that ended up getting released by the Marlins due to inconsistencies, and ended up going to the Diamondbacks, where he posted a really solid second half of the season with the Diamondbacks. The Tigers currently have James McCann as catcher, and Holiday, or not Holiday, but Saltalamacchia will go back there and back up McCann, and he's a guy that can give you some pop off the bench, can play some first base need be, so he provides you some versatility. And when you sign a guy for league minimum, I mean, it's impossible to be a bad deal, because you can get rid of him if he's terrible. But with the power he provides off the bench and the versatility they can give you, catcher, first base, he's a solid option behind James McCann. And then you look at another trade that went down today. Wade Miley and Jonathan Arroyo are going to the Seattle Mariners for Carson Smith and Roenis Elias. Now, this was a solid move for the Boston Red Sox, and it amazed me Dave Dombrowski was in Detroit for 10 years and couldn't manage to put together a decent bullpen, over 10 years, and couldn't manage to put together a decent bullpen, but in 3 months of being the Boston Red Sox general manager, he now goes and gets someone in Carson Smith, who people have referred to as a potential bullpen ace, goes out and gets Craig Kimbrell, and now he has Craig Kimbrell, Carson Smith, Koji Uehara, Junichi Chizawa, all in a bullpen that, could potentially be very, very good. And then to replace Wade Miley, who just did not pitch well at all with the Red Sox last year, he gets Roenis Elias. I always have a hard time saying that guy's name. Who, he had spurts of success with the Mariners. This is a guy that, he has decent stuff, and he's shown that he could be a pretty decent, back end of the mid to back endish starter. So I mean, you get some upside there with Elias. So this was a great move by Dave Dombrowski, and that's one thing you could never doubt about Dave Dombrowski, was the man's ability to flip talent for better talent. I mean, this is a guy that feasted on general managers for years. You look at some of his best trades: Miguel Cabrera, Doug Fister, when he acquired, Anibal Sanchez and Omar Infante. This was a guy that made a living off of selling junk for gold. And I think this was an outstanding move by Dombrowski, and he's done a great job so far with the Red Sox, flipping some of their talent and not spending their biggest prospects, even though he had to pay quite a price for Craig Kimbrell, and acquiring talent that could potentially help the Red Sox, their bullpen be very, very good. Now, speaking of former starters turned bullpen pitchers, Trevor Cahill is back with the Chicago Cubs for 1 year, $4.25 million. Cahill used to be a decent starter for 1 year with the Oakland A's, and then he suffered through injuries and inconsistencies and ended up getting traded to the Diamondbacks, where he ended up getting traded to the Atlanta Braves, where he ended up getting released, and the Chicago Cubs ended up picking him up, and he actually pitched pretty well in 17 innings with the Cubs last year in relief work to an ERA of 2.12. So they signed him for a 1 year, $4.25 million deal, and who knows how the Cubs expect to use him, if they plan to put him back in the bullpen or plan to use him out of the back end of the rotation or use him as a swingman. But nonetheless, it was a cheap signing and a low-risk move by the Chicago Cubbies. Now, there has been plenty of rumors floating around, and the biggest one is the Cincinnati Reds had supposedly traded Aroldis Chapman to the Los Angeles Dodgers, and it was a deal that was supposedly final, and it was announced, but then the Cincinnati Reds pulled back and go, "Oh, wait a sec, guys, this isn't going down yet. This deal isn't finalized." So now it's unsure of, is Aroldis Chapman going to LA, or are the Cincinnati Reds still listening to other offers on Aroldis Chapman? Now, this move for LA is kind of puzzling because they have Kenley Jansen. And Aroldis Chapman isn't about to move to the 8th inning rule. And Kenley Jansen, who has been a great closer, he probably doesn't prefer to move to the 8th inning role as well. So, that brings up the question, with both guys coming to their walk year, obviously the Dodgers aren't going to pay premium prices for two elite closers. So, do they try to acquire Chapman to go with the super bullpen with Kenley Jansen and Aroldis Chapman, or do they acquire Chapman to try to deal either he or Jansen to get more pieces for their team? So it's kind of puzzling. Nothing was announced with who the prospects were who was supposedly going over to Cincinnati in the trade for Chapman. Obviously, it's not going to be someone of Corey Seager or Jock Peterson or Julio Arias' stature for someone that's in their walk year as a closer. But nonetheless, it would have been an interesting move to see how the Dodgers handled that situation and how they would have used Chapman, or how they're going to, because the deal isn't finalized, but it's not dead either. So it is still plenty up in the air of how they were going to use Chapman, whether or not they plan to flip him, whether or not they plan to make like a super bullpen. But the deal is not finalized, and there is still a lot of speculation going around that Chapman could be dealt to another team besides the Los Angeles Dodgers. So stay tuned for that one. That's going to be one of the bigger storylines floating around winter meetings. Another huge storyline is Ben Zobrist. The Mets, Nationals, and Giants are among the three finalists for Ben Zobrist's services. Many people feel it's between the New York Mets and the Washington Nationals, simply for the fact that Ben Zobrist said he prefers to play second base, and with Joe Panik at second base for the San Francisco Giants, a guy who's under tape control for a long time, and he's a very good young second baseman, he isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So to assume that Zobrist would, a guy who can play outfield, he can play infield, he's very versatile. That's why, he's kind of like, the first utility guy that's going to get paid as well, as he's about to get paid. Because a lot of guys, even just 10 years ago, that could do what Ben Zobrist did, didn't make that much money. And, Ben Zobrist has kind of put super utility guys on the map. Jeff Keppinger used to be a guy when he played with the Rays and the White Sox. He used to be able to be, he was a poor man's Ben Zobrist. He was never as good as Ben Zobrist, but Keppinger, was a guy that could do it all. But Zobrist, he's just such a versatile bat, versatile glove. He's not got a lot of power, but he just gets on base, and he's a pesky hitter, and he's a quality hitter. So if any team I believe is going to overspend for him, it's going to be, the New York Mets, because when David Wright gets hurt next year, because he's going to find himself on the DL, he can play some third, and they can put him at second, and they can use him in the outfield need be and play him at first. So Zobrist would fit their needs very well. But so far, the three finalists are the Giants, the Nats, and the Mets, but it presumes that the Mets and the Nats are the front runners due to the fact that Ben Zobrist does prefer to play second base. Jose Fernandez, there's been a lot of rumors floating around him. Is he available? Is he not available? He is available. And I guess the Dodgers checked in on Jose Fernandez with the Miami Marlins, and they asked for Corey Seager and Julio Arias just to start conversations. So to say that their asking price is a tad high for Jose Fernandez, that's an understatement. It is not only tad high, it's sky high, and it's highly unlikely that any team, no matter, and Jose Fernandez, he's a great player. He is an absolutely outstanding pitcher, but you already got a guy that's a Tommy John. He had injuries after he came back off of Tommy John that robbed him of some of this season already. So to wipe your farm system completely clean for Jose Fernandez, you got to think long term here, and already a kid that's already had Tommy John and plenty of arm issues, it might not be the most wise thing, but to say that the price is high is an understatement when describing the status of Jose Fernandez. But many rival GMs have said, there's a 1% chance right now that Jose Fernandez gets traded, and he said, but towards later back into the winter meetings, there could be a 40% chance. And people of Miami Marlins have said that he's not available, he's not available, he's not available. But you keep hearing all these conflicting reports that he is available, he's not available, so who knows? But whoever does get Jose Fernandez, if he does get traded, is going to pay one hell of a price to acquire his services. That is for sure. Cliff Lee is actually drawing interest from 15 teams so far this winter meetings, and it makes a lot of sense. Cliff Lee hasn't appeared in a major league game since July 31st of 2014, and he just turned 37 this past August. So, Cliff Lee, who knows? He could be this year's Ryan Madsen. He's a guy who missed a lot of time, obviously over a year, and he's looking to fill his stock back up. Try to cash in on one more short-term deal, but get some high AAV out of it. So watch him sign maybe like a 1 year $5 million deal, 1 year $7 million deal with a very incentive-lative type contract, kind of like Scott Kazmir when he came back in the league with the Indians a couple years ago. So watch him to do that. But it doesn't surprise me that there's no shortage of teams watching Cliff Lee pitch and lining up for his services, because when Cliff Lee was Cliff Lee, he was one of the best. You're talking about a guy pinpoint command, good curveball, great control. So it doesn't surprise me that Lee's getting this much interest. So 15 teams trying to potentially acquire him. And the Brewers are supposedly listening on Jonathan Lucroy. So this is a team, doesn't surprise me. They were really bad last year, trying to rebuild their team. They already traded Carlos Gomez, and I'm sure if Ryan Braun didn't have the contract he had, they'd try to trade Ryan Braun. I bet you they would trade Gene Segura as well. So this is the team that, everyone is probably available on that team for the right price. So it doesn't surprise me that the Brewers are listening for offers on Jonathan Lucroy. And then there's a report out that the Los Angeles Angels are shopping left-hander C.J. Wilson, which makes sense. They signed Wilson at the same time they signed Albert Pujols a few years ago. And Wilson, he's had mixed results since going to Anaheim after leaving Texas. He's had some runs of success, but it's mainly been, a lot of inconsistencies, problem with walks, and, he's had a lot of bad stretches since putting on an Angels uniform. And the Angels right now, they're just trying to free up space, trying to free up salary, trying to free up money. And if they could trade C.J. Wilson to do that, I'm sure Artie Moreno would have no problem with that, especially considering they're rumored to be in on Yoenis Cespedes, someone they truly need, to be honest with you, to fill out the middle of the rotation, or not the rotation, but their lineup, because they lack a lot of lineup depth on that team, that is for sure. And then that's another big story that had just recently come out is Chris Bryant and Maikel Franco, have filed grievances against the respective teams, the Cubs and Phillies, over service time. Now, Franco, I don't know if he has as good a case as Chris Bryant does, but Chris Bryant certainly has a case. What happened to Chris Bryant, if you don't recall, earlier in spring training, Chris Bryant was absolutely tearing up spring training, had 9 home runs, led the MLB in home runs in spring training. And the Cubs elected not to bring him up with the opening day roster, instead sending him down for 8 games. So at the end of Chris Bryant's 6 years, he'd only have 5 years, 155 days of service time. So they essentially get 7 years instead of 6 years out of Chris Bryant. Well, having Scott Boras as your agent and trying to, with all these guys getting all these mega deals, it makes complete sense why someone represented by Scott Boras would file a grievance against their respective club over service time issues when you have Scott Boras representing you, because Scott Boras wants his clients to get to free agency as quick as possible. He wants them to try to cash it as quick as possible, and it doesn't surprise me that this has happened because unlike Franco, Chris Bryant was absolutely destroying everything and everyone when he was in spring training. I mean, there's no denying how good he was. I mean, 9 home runs, and then you don't get called up. And, Mike Olt, they said it was because he had to work on his defense, and Mike Olt did happen to get hurt at the same time they called up Chris Bryant, so the Cubs could use that in the grievance case against him to potentially cover their butts. But everyone and their brother knows that Chris Bryant was left down because the Cubs are trying to get the maximum amount of time that they can out of Chris Bryant, which makes complete sense if you're the Cubs. I mean, you don't want to have to pay this guy. You want to look what Giancarlo Stanton just got. And I mean, not saying that Chris Bryant's going to be Giancarlo Stanton, but you see these contracts for premium position players. I mean, just look at these pitchers. And, Zach Greinke's going to be almost $35 million a year. You're telling me in another 5 years that Chris Bryant could potentially not be a $40 million guy? When Bryce Harper is about to get paid in the next 2 years, he could be a $40 million guy. So who knows? So you can't blame the Cubs for trying to keep his clock delayed and get him at the cheapest price possible for as long as possible and have as much team control. But to file this grievance, it doesn't surprise me, especially with Scott Boras as his agent, because they want him to get the free agency as quick as possible, and they want to cash in as quick as possible. So this is going to be an interesting story and an interesting storyline to see how this works out between the Cubs and Chris Bryant, especially after Chris Bryant, won Rookie of the Year, and how successful the Cubs were, winning nearly 100 games and making it to the NLCS. So that is really about it. A little bit of breaking news, I guess you could suppose. You could say Darren O'Day, his deal is now done. He agreed to go back to the Baltimore Orioles, and the Orioles paid up for him too, especially a guy that is nearly in his mid-30s, and he got a 4-year deal. But O'Day was a premium arm that a lot of people have been going after. There was a lot of teams in on him, but he ends up going back to where he was most comfortable, and he's pitched a good bulk of his career. So Darren O'Day back to the Orioles. So that's really about it. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss everything that happened at day 2 of baseball winter meetings. And if any breaking news happens, be sure to tune in here to Baseball Central, because we have everything and anything baseball that's going on in the winter meetings covered. We actually have 3 correspondents covering the winter meetings as well right now. I believe Robert Murray, Nick Hamlin, and Jack McNeil are all at, and Jeff Snyder are all at the winter meetings right now, so be sure to tune in to their Twitters, and be sure to tune in here on YouTube if any big news or big trades go down, to get the latest breakdowns and analysis. I'm John Check for Baseball Central. I'll see you guys tomorrow.